The Russian military said on Monday that it had taken full control of the settlement of Bilohorivka in Ukraine's Luhansk region. But the Kyiv military said that it was holding Moscow troops back in the area. Now, the Russian Defense Ministry said in a statement that its forces had taken up better positions in the area. While Russia rejoices inside Ukraine, Kyiv rejoiced as it claimed to have destroyed a Russian minesweeper in the Black Sea. Is Ukraine carrying out attacks on Russian assets outside of Ukraine and Russian grounds to make up for the loss of defense on its home turf? To discuss matters further, we're joined by Ben Aris, who's the founder and editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews, and he's joining us from Berlin. Ben, always a pleasure speaking with you. Now, Russia's advancements on the front line after taking over Bilohorivka. Russia takes over Ukraine's symbol of resistance in the Luhansk region. Talk to us about what kind of blow this gives to Ukraine, which is anyways losing territory on a daily basis at the moment.
Indeed, the war for Ukraine is going extraordinarily badly for a couple of reasons. I mean, the first and most important is that they've run out of air defense missiles, or at least they're scraping the barrel. Zelensky, the president, has been on the wire a couple of times in the last few days and started to openly criticize the West for being so slow about supplying Ukraine with the ammunition they need to keep the skies closed. And that's given a free hand to Russia to pound the Ukraine with missiles. It's been targeting power generating facilities in particular, but also military targets. And there's very little Ukraine can do about that. At the same time, as you reported, as we've seen, there's a new offensive coming from the north on the border, attacking the Kyiv region. And Russia has been openly massing troops on its side of the border. And also pounding the city using rocket launchers from inside its own territory. And that's a problem too, because there's a de facto ban on Ukraine using NATO-supplied missiles to hit targets inside of Russia. And so it's left to have to accept these missiles coming in. There's very little it can do about it. And at the same time, Ukraine now is pushing very hard to be given permission to use NATO missiles against Russian troops and logistics on the inside across the border opposite the city of Kyiv. And so what is Ukraine been able to do? It's been hitting back the only way it can, using its long-range military drones to hit targets inside of Russia and targeting oil refineries and the like. But it's sort of an act of desperation because this doesn't bring it much military advantage. Yes. And it has no other real choice of effectively holding off the Russian attack.
Ben, now, if I were to just break it down a little further, Russia has already used the drones that it got from Iran. We found, some remains of a North Korean missile inside Ukraine that happened just last month. Russia's own defense manufacturing has seen a major boom in the last year itself. And now we saw Putin in China, and of course, they are no limits partners, and now China and Russia have termed each other as priority partners as well. Russia armed with Chinese, Iranian and North Korean weapons, is it safe to say that it is undefeatable at the moment?
It looks that way, to be honest. The departing defense minister, Shoigu, said a few weeks ago that the Russian economy now is on full war footing, and the production of weapons and munitions has gone up to the point where they're producing, quote unquote, more than they need, and they're sending them to warehouses. And this gives Russia an enormous advantage in so much as it can keep pounding the Ukrainian positions, whereas on the other side of the fence, Ukraine has this $61 billion promise from the States, but battlefield reports say almost no new weapons or ammunition has arrived on the battlefield. And so Ukraine is left fighting a rearguard action. I mean, they're just trying to hang on until these new supplies arrive, which are due to arrive sometime in June onwards. And that maybe will stabilize the battle line. But as you said, Ukraine is losing territory on a daily basis. And they're making heroic effort using what they have. Their drones, they do have drones, which they're making themselves. And these are actually quite effective against Russian advancing troops. So Russia, although it's been taking territory, has been doing it at the cost of enormous casualties. But then the Russian army has grown 15% in size thanks to an effective and successful voluntary campaign to sign up new conscripts to the Russian army. And so Russia has always been very freely spending in terms of men and casualty. and so is pushing its advantage despite its losses in those wounded on the battlefield.
Ben, anytime there is any kind of an escalatory comment which comes from the West, it's almost certain that Russia is going to push down or, insist on using nuclear weapons in the battlefield. Russia's nuclear saber rattling. How close do you think Russia is using a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, or is it just saber rattling at the moment?
I think the way to look at this is that there is now a non-zero possibility of a nuclear weapon being used. Having said that, I still think, although the line between where we are now in terms of escalation and using that weapon is still a ways away. Nevertheless, we keep doing this step-by-step gradual escalation. So, for example, Macron's talk of putting NATO troops on the ground, which has been echoed by the Estonians, and now Blinken has also suggested, or rather the Pentagon, that there's going to be US trainers on the ground in Ukraine. These are all steps towards that line. Having said that, I think it's still a long way away because nobody wants to go there. And the big problem that Russia has, it rattles its nuclear saber, is what keeps NATO out of this fight, which is why NATO is not putting troops or its own planes onto the ground in Ukraine. However, Putin has to be very reluctant to do that, partly for the historical legacy of being the man who used a nuclear weapon on civilians, and also because of the reaction that his partners, such as China, will have to that, because China will have to distance itself from Russia if it used a nuclear weapon. And that's a key relationship for the long-term fight that's obviously going to continue after the ceasefire, where Russia needs China as a close economic and military partner to stand up to the West. If Russia used a nuclear weapon, it would, in effect, isolate itself, not just from the rest of the world, but also its allies in the global South, which would be a huge problem. And that's what's going to prevent this from happening. I think Putin would have to be very desperate. He'd have to be losing the war in Ukraine before he contemplated using a nuclear weapon.
All right, definitely. Putin and Xi Jinping standing in the same frame is one image which would resonate very deeply in the West, as they would be watching very closely where that partnership is going. They've been clear on their end, both Xi Jinping and Putin, that they are priority partners now. Of course, we are going to be tracking all that's happening on the front lines between Russia and Ukraine. Ben, always a pleasure speaking with you. I'm glad we made it past those technical glitches and heard all your insights on this. Thank you so much for making time for the interview. Always a pleasure.